Catherine de' Medici stands as one of the most enigmatic and influential figures of the 16th century. Born into the illustrious yet controversial Medici family, she navigated a life fraught with political intrigue, personal tragedy, and unrelenting ambition. From an orphaned heiress shuffled between convents to the Queen of France and a formidable political force, Catherine's journey is a testament to resilience and strategic acumen. Her legacy is steeped in complexity, admired for her intelligence and cunning, yet feared for the ruthless methods she allegedly employed to secure power. The tumultuous era in which Catherine lived was defined by shifting alliances, religious conflicts, and the constant struggle for dominance among European monarchies. The Medici name alone carried significant weight, evoking both admiration and hostility across Italy and beyond. Catherine's marriage to Henry, the second son of the French king, was initially perceived as a strategic maneuver to fortify alliances. However, as fate would have it, Henry's unexpected rise to the throne transformed Catherine from a seemingly inconsequential consort into one of the most powerful women of her time. Despite her initial obscurity within the French court, Catherine's sharp intellect and adaptability ensured her survival. She maneuvered through the treacherous waters of courtly life, enduring betrayals, rivalries, and the dominance of her husband's mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Yet her greatest challenge came after Henry's death, when she assumed the role of regent for her young sons. As religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants reached a breaking point, Catherine found herself at the epicenter of power, accused of orchestrating massacres and manipulating rulers like a Machiavellian puppet master. While history has often portrayed Catherine as a sinister figure, her story is far more nuanced. She was a woman who wielded influence in a male-dominated world, a mother who fought to protect her dynasty, and a ruler who sought stability in a nation on the brink of collapse. Her involvement in the French Wars of Religion and her controversial role in the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre cemented her reputation as both a savior and a villain. Yet beyond the myths and accusations lies a legacy that reshaped the course of French history, influencing politics, culture, and diplomacy for generations to come. Catherine de' Medici was merely 14 years old when she wedded Henry, the son of King Francis I. Despite her youth, the king and other senior men insisted upon witnessing the marriage's consummation. Within a month of her birth, illness claimed both of Catherine's parents. Throughout the remainder of her childhood, the vulnerable Medici heiress was moved among various relatives and convents to shield her from the family's adversaries in an increasingly unstable Italy. Catherine's circumstances improved when her uncle Giulio de' Medici ascended to the papacy as Pope Clement's son. Clement brought his young niece to reside in an opulent palace in Florence, where the populace affectionately dubbed her the Little Duchess. Medici dominance in Florence collapsed in 1527. Cardinal Silvio Passerini deposed Pope Clement, and suddenly Catherine's tranquil childhood descended into turmoil once more. Passerini's forces captured Catherine and dispatched her to live isolated in a succession of convents. The Pope, desperate to recover his authority, was prepared to strike a bargain with anyone. He pleaded with Charles I, the King of Spain, for assistance, promising in exchange to crown Charles as the Holy Roman Emperor. In 1530, anti-Medici forces surrounded the nunnery where young Catherine sought sanctuary. Public discourse debated whether the 11-year-old heiress should simply be executed or sent to a brothel to diminish her value in the Pope's marriage strategies. Fortunately, Florence capitulated later that year before any significant harm befell Catherine. Clement had successfully removed her from Florence, and now it was imperative to secure a husband for his young orphan niece. Contemporaries frequently noted that Catherine de' Medici lacked renowned beauty, even in her younger years. A Venetian envoy depicted her as small of stature and thin, and without delicate features, but having the prominent eyes peculiar to the Medici family. Pope Clement struck gold when the King of France, Francis I, proposed his second son as a match for young Catherine. Francis was unaware at the time, but he had just admitted a viper into the French court, and the nation would be forever altered. The nuptials of Catherine de' Medici and Henry, Duke of Orleans, constituted an absurdly lavish event. The French and Italians traded costly presents, consumed exotic cuisine, and celebrated deep into the night. Notwithstanding their enchanting wedding, Catherine de' Medici and Henry saw little of one another during their initial year of marriage. The Duke occupied his time touring the countryside, while Catherine remained in the precarious environment among the court ladies. But Catherine was a Medici. She was inherently suited to playing the political game. She made a positive impact on the court with her intelligence and diplomacy, quickly adapting to the rhythm of court affairs. In 1534, Catherine's cherished uncle, Pope Clement VII, passed away. Instantly, Catherine's connection to Rome vanished, rendering her considerably less significant. Then Clement's successor, Pope Paul III, exacerbated the situation by declining to remit the substantial dowry Clement had pledged. Within days, Catherine's status at the French court had fundamentally shifted. Her husband was never destined to be King of France, but circumstances could alter rapidly in a Renaissance court. In 1536, the heir to the throne, Henry's older brother Francis, was engaged in a game of tennis when he began to feel unwell. Within days, he was deceased, shocking Europe and propelling Henry into the line of succession. Suddenly, the young orphaned Medici girl found herself positioned to become the Queen of France, and dark speculations soon began to circulate. Although Catherine was never proven to have arranged Francis's demise, one member of her retinue faced a different fate. Sebastiano de Montecuccoli, who had arrived in France with Catherine, confessed under pressure to poisoning the prince. His admission satisfied King Francis, who had him executed by drawing and quartering. After 10 years of a childless marriage, during which doubts arose concerning Catherine's fertility, the couple proceeded to have an impressive 10 children between 1544 and 1556. 7 of these offspring survived beyond infancy. During this time in 1547, Francis I died and Henry ascended to the throne. For years, Catherine's foremost rival was Diane de Poitiers, her husband's most favored mistress. Henry made no attempt to conceal his preference for Diane over his wife. This must have been maddening for Catherine, but then Henry escalated matters. He bestowed upon Diane the luxurious Château de Chenonceau. Not only was he gifting his mistress an entire castle, but Catherine had clearly informed him that she desired that specific castle for herself. In 1559, King Henry ratified a peace agreement with the Holy Roman Empire in England, concluding the Italian wars that had persisted for years. To solidify the treaty definitively, Henry arranged the betrothal of his daughter Elizabeth to Philip II of Spain. An elaborate wedding was organized to commemorate the newfound peace. Little did anyone anticipate that the wedding would culminate in tragedy. King Henry was a notable jouster, so naturally he felt compelled to exhibit his skills at his daughter's wedding. In a contest with a young nobleman, tragedy occurred. Henry sustained a lance blow to the face, which shattered the massive wooden weapon, embedding splinters across his face. Bleeding profusely and with wood fragments protruding from his face, the king presented a horrifying spectacle. Catherine, Diane de Poitiers, and Catherine's eldest son, Francis, all fainted upon witnessing him. Henry was urgently taken to a surgeon, but his injuries were graver than initially apparent. Surgeons extracted 5 large splinters from Henry's head, but the damage was irreversible. They had penetrated his eye and brain, 2 areas famously not meant to be pierced by large splinters. He ultimately lost his vision and the capacity to speak, and on July 10, 1559, he died at the age of 40. Catherine was heartbroken. Her eldest son, Francis II, assumed the throne at just 15 years of age. Although technically an adult, he was ill-prepared to govern independently. As Catherine was still mourning, a leadership vacuum emerged, one that 2 cunning brothers from the House of Guise swiftly exploited. In what essentially constituted a coup, the Guise brothers relocated into the Louvre and established themselves as advisors to the young king. Francis was the monarch in name only, but everyone understood the grim reality. The Guise brothers held the power. But for how long? Once Catherine regained composure after the shock of her husband's death, she discovered the Guises exercised near total control over her son's kingdom. At this juncture, she had no alternative but to collaborate with the usurpers, lacking any substantial power herself yet. Catherine's son Francis was never a healthy child, and evidently, the burdens of kingship only worsened his condition. Less than a year after his coronation, he developed a painful infection and hovered near death. Catherine was grief-stricken, but recognized the need to move quickly to secure the throne for her next son. By the time Francis died, Catherine had executed sufficient strategic actions to have the Royal Council designate her governor of France. For the first time, she wielded genuine political authority. Charles IX was nominally the king, but Catherine represented the true authority. Her reign was characterized by savage sectarian conflict. Catholics demanded the persecution of Protestants, while Protestants sought the liberty to practice their faith. These tensions had simmered for the better part of a century, but they finally erupted when Catherine assumed power. Even after Catherine became governor of France, the Duke of Guise retained significant influence in the French court. Catherine largely tolerated him, but she would eventually pay for her patience. In 1562, Guise and his men perpetrated the brutal massacre of Vassy. They assaulted a group of Protestants, known as Huguenots, during their worship service. When the violence subsided, 74 Huguenots lay dead, and another 104 were injured. Guise had unknowingly initiated a devastating conflict. The Massacre of Vassy ignited the French Wars of Religion, the defining struggle of Catherine de' Medici's life. Catholic and Huguenot armies would ravage the French countryside for nearly 3 decades, with Catherine, her children, and the rest of the French royal family caught in the midst. Catherine de' Medici adopted a remarkably direct involvement in the French Wars of Religion. She was frequently observed visiting the battlefields herself to oversee affairs. When one of her generals remarked that the battlefield was unsuitable for a woman, she laughed and coolly retorted, "My courage is as great as yours." The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre represents the most notorious event on Catherine de' Medici's already troubling record. As anxieties about Huguenot retaliation escalated, King Charles IX finally issued a grim directive: kill them all. Catholics surged into the streets with malicious delight, and events rapidly spiraled out of control. The killings commenced in Paris but swiftly extended to the countryside. No Huguenot was secure. Estimates of the total number of Protestants slain vary from 5,000 to over 30,000. The massacre severely weakened the Huguenot power base and signified a critical turning point in the French Wars of Religion. Towards the end of his life, Charles IX became emotionally volatile. He would oscillate between bragging about the death toll of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, being racked with guilt over the atrocities, and simply attributing the cause to his mother. Ever the pragmatic mother, Catherine declared she had a lunatic for a son. There was never a tranquil moment in 16th century French society. Just a couple of years after the massacre, Catherine confronted a new tragedy and a new crisis. Following the path of his brother, Charles IX succumbed to illness at the mere age of 23. Catherine was compelled to bury another of her children, but Charles would not be the final one. Next in line for the throne was Catherine de' Medici's favored son, Henry III. Catherine's youngest son, Francis, Duke of Anjou, was perpetually the family outcast, known enigmatically as Monsieur. Initially positioned far down the line of succession, Francis was never expected to achieve prominence. But suddenly, with Charles deceased and Henry III childless, Monsieur found himself next in line for the throne. However, rather than return home and fulfill his duty, Francis betrayed his mother and destroyed everything she had worked to achieve. In 1576, Francis committed the inconceivable. He allied with the Protestants against his brother and mother. This improbable alliance compelled Catherine to sign the degrading Edict of Beaulieu, yielding to Huguenot demands for the first time in years. Unsurprisingly, she was utterly enraged with her rebellious son. Yet despite his betrayal, she was still profoundly devastated when fate claimed him as well. Francis was the next of Catherine de' Medici's children to die young, and his demise jeopardized her entire achievement. Francis was the last of her sons, and since King Henry III had no children, Henry III of Navarre, her daughter's husband, now stood next in line. Everything Catherine had constructed was rapidly disintegrating around her. With Henry of Navarre now heir to the French throne, her daughter Margaret, Henry's wife, gained unprecedented importance. But Margaret proved even more defiant than Monsieur had been. Margaret's persistent affairs had posed a problem before her marriage to Henry III of Navarre, and marriage did little to restrain her. When Margaret returned to the French court in 1582, her mother furiously confronted her regarding her affairs. Catherine de' Medici's rage was always a formidable sight, and her shouts could reportedly be heard echoing throughout the palace. Catherine dispatched Margaret back to Navarre to be with her husband, the future King of France. However, Catherine's yelling apparently failed to correct the behavior of the rebellious Margaret. Soon after, she departed Navarre once more, escaping to an estate in the French countryside. Then she had the boldness to write to Catherine, pleading for funds. Repulsed, Catherine sent her daughter only enough money for sustenance. Yet somehow Margaret wasn't finished creating chaos. She acquired yet another lover, a man named D'Aubiac. This was the last provocation. Catherine was through with her daughter's behavior. Upon learning about Dobiac, Catherine had her daughter confined in a castle and completely removed her from her will. She never saw Margaret again. As far as Catherine was concerned, her child was dead to her. Catherine's intentions for Dobiac were too harsh, even for her son, King Henry III. Henry had Dobiac executed, but not as Catherine had wished in Margaret's presence. Henry III valued his mother's counsel, that is, until her final days. Catherine had contracted a lung infection and was confined to bed. While battling for her life, she remained unaware that her son was scheming to sever her from power permanently. In 1588, Henry abruptly dismissed every single one of his advisors without notice. Many had been loyal to Catherine, and this shocking maneuver left Catherine with virtually no influence at court. After discharging all of his mother's allies, the Duke of Guise was one of the final obstacles between Henry and absolute authority. Catherine had previously cautioned him that eliminating Guise would be catastrophic, but Henry sought retribution. In December 1598, Henry summoned Guise to visit him in his private rooms. Upon arrival, Guise encountered the king's personal bodyguard awaiting him. They attacked him with their swords, and at that exact moment, the remainder of the Guise family were being apprehended and killed as well. For the first time, Henry had completely ignored his mother and acted independently, and he would face consequences for it. The murder of the Duke of Guise, executed expressly against Catherine's counsel, occurred directly above the bedchamber where she lay dying. After the act was completed, King Henry went downstairs and delivered the news to his mother himself. "Please forgive me. Monsieur de Guise is dead. He will not be spoken of again. I have had him killed. I have done to him what he was going to do to me." Catherine passed away mere days later, and some posit that the shock of her son's actions was the final catalyst. After eliminating the Guise family, Henry apprehended several other individuals he deemed political adversaries. A mere 8 months following Catherine's death, retribution arrived at Henry III's door. The purge of his political foes did little to stabilize the chaos in the French court, and he was ultimately stabbed to death by a Catholic zealot. Following the deaths of Catherine and her final son, Henry III, Catherine's son-in-law claimed the throne as Henry IV of France. However, he promptly annulled his marriage to Catherine's daughter Margaret, replacing her with Catherine's own cousin, Marie de Medici. Catherine de Medici played the game of power politics skillfully for decades, but like many French nobles, she met an extremely undignified end regarding her final resting place. Catherine's bones, along with those of numerous other French monarchs, were exhumed during the French Revolution and disrespectfully thrown into a mass grave. Catherine de Medici received a disturbing initiation into French politics on her wedding night. She and Henry were the same age, both 14, but older men still intruded upon their honeymoon. Henry's father, King Francis III, reportedly remained in the bedroom until the marriage was fully consummated. Catherine's uncle, Pope Clement, displayed slightly more decorum. At least he visited the couple in bed the following morning to verify the previous night's events. Gross. Catherine de Medici's legacy is one of paradox and profound influence. A woman of remarkable intelligence and adaptability, she navigated the perils of the French court with a blend of diplomacy and ruthlessness, ensuring the survival of her children and the Medici name in the annals of history. Whether remembered as a shrewd strategist or a sinister mastermind, her impact on France remains undeniable. She was not merely a queen consort or a grieving widow. She was a political architect, a mother determined to secure her family's future, and a ruler who operated in an era where survival demanded both cunning and resolve. Her reign was marred by relentless conflict, with the French Wars of Religion serving as the defining struggle of her lifetime. Accusations of poisonings, betrayals, and manipulative schemes followed Catherine until her death, shaping the way history has remembered her. Yet her true motivations remain subject to debate. Was she an advocate for peace, seeking to balance power among warring factions? Or was she the cold-hearted orchestrator of bloodshed? In truth, she was likely both, an embodiment of the turbulent world in which she lived, where moral ambiguity was often a necessity rather than a choice. Despite her best efforts, Catherine's later years were filled with heartache and political disappointment. The premature deaths of her sons dismantled her carefully laid plans, leaving the French crown in the hands of the Protestant Henry of Navarre, a development she had fought so hard to prevent. In the end, her dreams of a Catholic dynasty unraveled, but her influence endured. The policies she championed, The political marriages she arranged and the lessons she imparted to her children all shaped the future of France in ways even she could not have foreseen. Catherine de' Medici's story is not one of simple villainy or heroism, but of a woman who embodied the spirit of her time. She played the game of power as well as any man of her era, defying expectations and carving out a place for herself in history. Her legacy is immortalized in the grandeur of the French Renaissance, the political intrigues of the Valois court, and the continued fascination with her life and deeds. In the grand tapestry of history, she remains an enduring figure, both feared and revered but never forgotten.